Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. Rocky Anderson was mayor of Salt Lake City, Utah. He was one of the mayors, one of the very few, maybe only mayor of a major American city that came out against the Iraq War and a whole string of progressive causes. He helped found the Justice Party in 2011 and became its presidential candidate. And as I said on the night of the election a few days ago, we hope to be a platform to discuss what everyone's going to do next and how to respond to the Trump presidency. And now joining us is Rocky Anderson. Thanks for joining us, Rocky.
Great to be with you again, Paul.
So first of all, how do you assess, how does, not the polling game so much, but the fact that that's such an overt right-wing agenda, anywhere from outright climate denial to building the wall and xenophobia and so on, such an overtly right agenda is able to succeed in this country?
Well, I think people are clearly frustrated. They feel like the establishment has betrayed them. People see that economic disparity keeps getting worse and worse, and nobody's doing anything about it. And a lot of these things, I think, are right in front of their faces, and so they're not that worried about whether we're going to, for instance, abide by international law. I just got word from somebody, nothing really surprises me anymore, but sometimes I do lose my breath when I see these messages like the one I just received that John Bolton is under consideration as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Now, this man has nothing but contempt for the United Nations as an institution.
Yeah, he was the ambassador for Bush to the United Nations during the Bush, several years during the Bush administration.
That's right. So it was either, whoever sent that to me said either Secretary of State or UN ambassador, so U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. But it just becomes beyond shock. I said, these posts that I get sound more like a really bad Onion article that could have been written a month ago about what it would look like under a Trump administration. I think that a lot of people were fooling themselves thinking that, well, he's just saying these things to get elected, and when he gets there, he's really going to go back to his more democratic or progressive roots. He claimed years ago that he's more Democrat than he is Republican, but when you see this anti-environmentalism, this racism, the xenophobia, the hatred toward Muslims, the message that sends the world, it is extremely dangerous. So it goes beyond our own personal political offense that we take at what he's doing.
Rocky, what happened in Salt Lake City? How did people vote?
Well, it was amazing. Everybody said month after month that LDS people, Mormons, didn't like Trump because he's such a slimeball. I'm paraphrasing. But they didn't like him for a lot of obvious reasons. And so there was this third-party candidate who came along, and everybody said, oh, look at him. He's neck and neck with Trump. So that's where the Mormon vote's going to go. Well, in the end, it didn't. And in interview after interview, people made clear that when they went in the polling booth, they knew that it was going to be one or the other, and they disliked Hillary Clinton so much, they ended up voting for Trump.
And true in Salt Lake City as well?
No, not in Salt Lake City proper. Salt Lake City proper is actually a very progressive city. We almost always go Democrat in Salt Lake City, but we're also only about 182,000 people. It's a wonderful city. I love being mayor of Salt Lake City for 8 years, and I love living here. But outside of our city boundaries, it's a very backward, I don't even like to use the word conservative anymore, but it's a culture that harkens back to a time that probably really didn't exist.
And how do the Mormons who voted for Trump get their heads around, I mean, his religious fidelity, if such a thing exists, is rather a smokescreen, and they know that. his personal history, his business history. I mean, there's just nothing in this guy that one on the face of it would think that would appeal to seriously religious people. So how do they justify this to themselves?
You're asking the wrong guy. I've asked the same thing, but clearly there's a gross hypocrisy at work here. There's such an example here of the proclaimed virtues and values of people being belied by what they end up actually doing. And in this instance, supporting this person who is going to do so much damage around the world, in our nation, toward the most vulnerable, whether it's in terms of healthcare, economic disparity, international relations, the future of our planet, and climate protection. So it's mind-boggling to me that there's such a disconnect between values.
One of the people who writes about these issues, I asked, and he said they just, the religious right do not see him as some religious or moral leader, and they can forgive all the various things because they see him as a political vehicle. They'll get the Supreme Court they want. They'll get legislation they want. And the rest they can kind of not worry much about because, as I said, they'll get what they want on the politics side.
Well, you're more generous toward how deeply people analyze this, probably, than a lot of us would be. I think a lot of this is on a very visceral level, and there was such utter disdain and lack of trust, and for good reason, toward Hillary Clinton. And the polls nationwide showed it.
But when you say that a lot of people who voted for Trump are really not all that aware of policy issues and substantive issues, it's more visceral. While I agree, there is plenty of reasons to have visceral hatred for Hillary Clinton and her history. On the other hand, I would think a lot of people don't really know that history all that well. So why the visceral hatred?
Well, first of all, she's been around for a long time. People do not trust her. Her politically opportunistic flip-flopping on everything, whether it's marriage equality, where she went from no to yes, only after the polls showed that was safe, on the TPP, and Donald Trump pointed it out. She said it was the gold standard until she had to run against Bernie Sanders, and then all of a sudden she says she's opposed to it. You just listen to her over the years, and you never know when her lips start moving, what's going to come out. And
but all of that, on the face of it, all of that's true for Trump. On Iraq War, he didn't tell the truth that he was really for it. He was more overtly for the Libyan intervention, where he called at the time for all American troops in the Middle East to go into Libya and overthrow Gaddafi. I mean,
yeah, but he was out there as a member of the public, whereas Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, making all of that happen, and that was a war crime. I think what happened there, and then going into Syria and lying to the American people and fueling that bloodbath in Syria. I was saying this in 2012. When Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were running against each other, the extent of their debate was whether we send small arms or large arms to the so-called insurgents. Well, those so-called insurgents are being financed by the likes of Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and they're coming in, the Wahhabis, and it's been a kind of a proxy war that the United States is engaged in that's caused so much utter suffering and tragedy for the Syrian people, and now it's overflowing around the world with this migrant crisis, and people want somebody to be held to account. And it's not all Hillary Clinton, certainly, but she's certainly been part of that establishment that's brought us to this point.
So what now, Rocky? The Justice Party, and how do you see the movement for the kind of progressive values you believe in? What do you think needs to be done? What's the Justice Party going to do?
Well, I think it's so clear that there's been a major transformation of the Democratic Party. There's still a lot of Democrats, I think most of them, who have great intentions, that they think that this is still the Democratic Party of FDR. And it simply is not. Ever since probably Bill Clinton and Democratic Leadership Council, they've shown their stripes. This has become a party for the financiers, for wars of empire. And I don't say any of that lightly. It saddens me, really, because I was a proud Democrat when I was first elected mayor of Salt Lake City. But we've seen this major shift. What did we see with Bill Clinton? He brings in the head of Goldman Sachs, the same folks who were stuffing hundreds of thousands of dollars into Hillary Clinton's pockets right before she started her campaign, a sort of pre-bribe. So Bill Clinton brings in the head of Goldman Sachs as Treasury Secretary, lets him move forward along with Congress to repeal Glass-Steagall, which was Depression-era legislation to protect the American people against investment in commercial banks and insurance companies becoming centralized and having that kind of power and being able to wreak so much havoc so recklessly on our economy.
And I don't, right now, the corporate Democrats still control the machine, more or less. But what's the Justice Party planning to do? What do you think progressive people should be doing?
So we saw a need for another party, and not with the idea of being a fringe third party. We have the intent of becoming a new majoritarian party. It's sort of like when the Whigs were fighting among themselves over slavery in the new territories, and the Republican Party came in. No more. Everybody left the Whigs. It divided, imploded, and you had the Republican Party, at least among the North, and you had the Know-Nothing Party in the South. We could see very easily, I think, the same kind of thing where folks finally realize, especially among the younger people who are energized so much by Bernie Sanders, people are seeing the Democratic Party has become an entirely different party, much like the Republican Party used to be. It's feeding at the trough of all the contributions from Wall Street, from the military-industrial complex. They didn't really get anything done. And all this time, Democrats have been in the White House, and during the times that they had the majority of the Senate and even of the House, they didn't really do anything about climate change in all those years. So we need a party that can be home to people, good moderate Republicans, good Democrats, independents, people who want to have a home and find a different way than we've seen under this absolutely corrupt duopoly of the Republican and Democratic Party. Where, and I say that in the singular, that's not a Freudian slip. It really has become one party that joins together to keep everybody else out. There's Republican Democratic parties that form the Presidential Debate Commission.
Now, there are other parties, and obviously the one on the left that was most active during this election was the Green Party. You told me off camera you chose not to run in this party because this election cycle, because you didn't want to do anything that might help elect Trump. That being said, why another party? Why wouldn't the various third parties get together? Number one. Number two, the Sanders movement, did it not show that, well, in terms of developing the conditions for a broader movement for an alternative party, that maybe that is the way it's going to happen, is a fight within the Democratic Party that then leads to something else?
No, because I think a lot of people just exited the Democratic Party, like I did years ago. People are saying no more. We see a corrupt party, a party that calls the shots. I mean, what did they do after McGovern was their nominee? They set up this system where the leadership can really call the shots with the special delegates, so that it's not the people that elect their delegates. Well, they elect some of them, so it looks like we honor the will of the people. But then you have the special delegates that are picked by those who are in power in the party, and they just keep perpetuating themselves.
So why wouldn't you get together with the Greens and maybe even some other of the third parties and try to form kind of a broader front?
Well, I actually talked with people in the Green Party, including Jill Stein, about that in 2011 before we formed the Justice Party. And I said, you know, as much as I love Jill and a lot of the folks in the Green Party and love what they stand for on the whole, they're always going to be a fringe lefty party. That's the way they're perceived. That's, you know, they, even when they get public funding, as they did in 2012, she got what, 0.3%, 0.3% of the vote. This time it was less than 1% of the vote.
Why did you do better than that when you ran?
No, much worse. I mean, I wasn't running to be president of the United States, and we only, I think, qualified on the ballot in 15 states, and in several of those, it's because there was a progressive party or a natural law party or an independent party that nominated me as their candidate in those states. We worked, I mean, it was a total shoestring operation. I paid to open up our office out of my own pocket, and I don't have large pockets. And we traveled around. I'd sleep on people's couches as I was campaigning. I was doing this to try to get something launched and also to help raise awareness. And it was amazing. I would be out on the stump. Sometimes I'd speak 4, 5, 6 times a day and we got a lot of media. It was amazing. I mean, we certainly didn't get what the Republicans and Democrats were getting, but far more for a third party than we had seen previously.
We don't have too much time, more time, Rocky. What concerns you most about the Trump presidency?
I'm terrified at his disdain for the role of international law or treaty obligations, when he just shrugs at things like the Convention Against Torture, including our own domestic laws against torture. In terms of the long term, he's a disaster when it comes to climate change. And every single day, we're falling further and further behind in terms of what we can do to mitigate the impacts of climate change. We need somebody in that office that understands the science and is willing to do politically what it takes to protect our climate, because in the long run, that and nuclear proliferation, those are the two existential threats that we're facing now, and certainly our children and later generations are going to be facing. It just tears me apart to see what's going to happen to our public lands, what's going to happen to education in this country. We've already become a country where it's such a classist society in terms of who can even seek out a higher education. So we've all got to stay vigilant, and we've got to continue the fight. Anybody that says they're just going to give up because we can't beat these folks, we can and we will. That pendulum has swung so far to the right. We can make this a much better nation, and maybe in the long run this will be a better thing, because people will see that we've got to come back to reason, and we've got to get back to a government that represents all of the people and the public interest.
All right, thanks very much for joining us, Rocky.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.